be aware, we can discuss also really about concrete actions. Let's go on for the first block. It's about the talent development programs. Let me make one statement before we start the discussion and ask you who wants to take the floor. I think everybody in Europe, in the EU, has the right, has the access to go for a study. Of course, there are all sorts of restrictions on fees and whatever, but I can study in Luxembourg or I can go for the study somewhere else. That's what we have opened between each other. I noticed something, and I'm not going to call the name of the country, that once you have a talented son or daughter, and you don't have the nationality of that country, the sports academies or the sports schools on secondary level or even earlier are sometimes refusing you, and you don't have the access for that education. There are all sorts of reasons for that, I'm sure. But there is a slight difference between these two ideas of having free access to education. Of course, you have to pay or whatever, but no free access for talented players once you are living abroad. I don't know how you think about, panelists, about this idea that maybe for young talented players, it shouldn't make a big difference where you live. It should be a good idea to have access to a tennis school, to a specific sports school, a tennis academy. I can explain why there are some barriers on that, but I want to first discuss the issue, how you feel it in principle, about this discussion we had already before the break, about should we protect, even for young talented players, this sort of academies, or should it be more open, and what to do, how to open these sort of things. Who wants to take the floor? I provoke you a bit with this question, because I'm going to have some other questions, but are there different opinions on this? Are talented players living abroad, shouldn't they make use of the same facilities because they are living there? Or should they return home to be a good tennis player?
I'm taking the floor.
Wolfgang.
But I want to start a bit more bottom-up, if I'm allowed to, because I think there is one thing that has to be understood in advance, and it's often misunderstood. Talent development is not about supporting talent athletes. It is about supporting human beings that follow a competitive career, and it's a big difference. Paul calls it the whole person approach 10 years ago. I think that's a big difference. And Bart, concerning your question, doing something abroad, basically, going abroad, coming here, that's always a transition. Let's call it a mini transition to come here. And young talents are going through a dynamic phase in a lot of aspects. So we got psychological aspects, we got psychosocial aspects, we got a lot of dynamic in the sport world, we got physical aspects. And all these aspects need a very strong support system, especially also in comparison to elite athletes. So as you heard before, I'm speaking from the perspective of a person actually working with athletes. So I'm working one-to-one with them. So I know the struggles of talent athletes quite well, I guess. And you cannot simply answer the question, should it be possible to study abroad, to attend a school abroad? It is only meaningful when there is a support system that's strong enough to accompany this phase. I think that's a very important thing to state in advance.
Thank you very much for this. But
I think there is a clear line that needs to be drawn between, let's say, talented athletes in professional sports and talented athletes in general. because there is also an if you look at the training center of FC Barcelona that has been under the spotlight last year, they bring over all kinds of nationalities and all kinds of kids from all around the world. This is allowed somehow, but what restrains that is the International Federation transfer rules of minor. So, the transfer rule says that if you don't travel with your parents, you're not allowed to go in the country if you're under 18. Which makes sense at the end, because when you're a teenager, you want to spend as much time as you can with your parents. But that's definitely an issue, because then they move to Barcelona and then they end up in an academy where potentially school is left on the side because they see the potential footballers in them. So that's one part of the problem. So related to professional sports, related to the regulation of international federations. And it's not only the case for football. And then there is a regular EU citizens who grow within the EU. His parents move around the EU, and all of a sudden he has a talent, or he develops a talent for a certain sport, and then he can, access to a certain level of competition, which is also a problem and needs to be addressed maybe in a different way. But the way sport has been constructed by the Olympic movement put a lot of pressure on the International Federation to regulate the competition, and for that they are kind of denying access to same level of education to young athletes.
Thank you very much for this clarification. I think it's very important to see the difference, because that's what you pointed out very clearly, between professional sports, or let's say the sports where you don't really talk about national teams, and the discussion on sports linked to national teams and the Olympic, most of the Olympic sports, although that's today a grey zone as well, because of professional and amateur sports are quite mixed. Tuli.
In Finland we have a slogan that the best with the best, which means for us that we want to create for our even the young talented athletes and also the elite athletes the best training environment, and sometimes to them to train together, and sometimes it means that our best goes abroad with other best, and sometimes it means that we invite the best to us, but this has to be done as you said, so that the athlete is being developed holistically, not just because of the sport, but because of the whole situation. This must be taken in care. But the best with the best, I think it would be also a slogan for Europe.
Thank you for that slogan. Maybe we can note that down already. Laurent?
Yeah, if I can add to that, the best with the best, I think that's a very important approach that should every country adopt, because in Europe, even for the big countries, it's often hard to find enough athletes at a high level, or even talented athletes that want to get to that high level, that work together. And in training, it's so important to work with other athletes that have the same level. If you're always the best or the fastest or the most skilled football player in training, at some point you just start developing, because you think, oh, I'm good enough. But if you get pushed, you work so much harder and you get to a much, much higher level. And just coming back to your example where a kid is not accepted to a school because it has a different nationality, is because many countries don't see this added value of taking these kids in, because they just see a rival in it, because they think, oh, if we train that person, it might take medals away from us. But they don't see the advantage for their own athletes as well, that they get out of it.
If I take the message of the two of you now, then you say there is a high international, let's say, value for athletes to meet, to compete, to train with other people abroad. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
If that's the case, are we doing enough in Europe? Are we making use of mobility programs, for instance, in between schools or colleges in this way? Because it's not about the elite athlete, we are still talking about the young talents. Are we making use enough, or are there barriers to make use of this sort of mobility programs where schools exchange is taking place with sport colleges or sport academies?
Part of my background is also working within badminton and the performance board inside Badminton England as well. And just reflecting on what you're saying, the barriers very often are budgetary more than anything else, I'm afraid. Because I think there is a growing willingness in some national governing bodies of sport, certainly in my country, to look at exchange opportunities, opportunities where maybe the parent has had to come to live in a country and there the child is very talented at the junior level particularly and needs that opportunity, and they're very welcome as sparring partners, whatever it might be, on the field of play. But I think that there are budgets which are set in national governing bodies in many cases which preclude bringing too many other individuals onto the programme, and that I see as a real problem on occasions.
There was a study done not long ago by the European Commission, and I look for Yves as well a little bit in this sense, but if I'm correctly, then the study proves that the sports movement was not really aware of the opportunities within Erasmus Plus to do this sort of programs. You have the same, I mean, this study was done and it was proposed to say, let's see what's happening. Then I found out there was, for instance, the Leeds College taking an exchange program quite intensively with the Bosan Academy in Sweden, which is the National Sports Center, where both schools, both colleges were exchanging every year, twice, 3 times, to exchange and to get the experience, not only for the athletes, but also for the coaches, maybe even for the staff of those institutes. Is that an interesting perspective?
It definitely is. There is something in between the lines, what you just said, Bart. On a school level, there is something like a mini Erasmus Plus, and it's the only category where that's possible. Because my personal experience is that a lot of institutions, no matter if it's an educational institution or a sport institution, lack the personal capacity of handling a big Erasmus Plus project. And this is a lot of times a hindering factor of doing something. But on a school level, it's already possible on a bilateral level. So it can be already 2 schools doing a project together. And I think that's a huge opportunity in terms of exchange on a school level for young talents.
Are there any people here in the audience experienced with an exchange program like that? The Sports Lycée in Luxembourg, maybe? No? So it looks like this could be an issue which we should address in the future. Is that correct? The question, of course, is how we should address that. And it's not only a way of informing people, but maybe also supporting people, because the issues on this sort of exchange programs and the administration are maybe not that easy.
There is a, related to professional sports, and I'm mainly talking about that because, like you said, we are a trade union. There is another aspect to the development of youth talent, is the homegrown player rule. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's the capacity for leagues and clubs to go against the freedom of movement within the European space, or to find rules that are forcing their player, not forcing, but encouraging their player to stay trained in the country. It can have a long-term effect on the mobility of young athletes, of course, because the national teams, the federations, the clubs, they want to hold the best talents, and they want to make sure that they're going to be able to compete for their national team on a 4, 5, 6, 7 year ahead of them. So that's also, for the professional part, a really important point, because I can understand that if the, let's say, Romanian federation doesn't want his talents to leave the country, because they would be considered as a homegrown player for Spain or France or Germany, but will not be considered as a local player for their own national team. So if that's true, they are being trained in a country, but they also belong to their home country, which is a problem. So for me, the main issue remains that the sport movement is really scared about this freedom of movement within the European Union. I think it's the follow-up of the Bosman case, basically, and also the fact that sport, or professional sport, I mean sport in general, is not considered as a job. You were talking about professional sport. I'm a professional athlete. I'm talking more about working athletes than being professional, because being professional doesn't mean anything. I mean, I think Debbie will talk about that later today, but for me, you're an Olympic athlete, you're working athletes because you have to make your living out of the job that you're doing every day. Okay. So the home-grown player rules has an effect on the mobility of young athletes. That's an issue in professional sport.
Okay. I want to address one other issue in this discussion on the talented players, the talent development system. We're all aware that young players are more and more invited for quite big tournaments. I mean, in the past we didn't have under 17, under 12 or whatever tournaments. Today in many sports we see these tournaments going on. Not only for a weekend, sometimes 1 week. And if you talk about the Youth Olympic Games or the Student Games or whatever, it's more than a week even. What do you think, panelists? Should those organizers of these events, linked to, of course, to the international federation responsible for those championships, offer services for dual careers if students are so long away from home, from their school? Or is it simply, no, these weeks are for the event, full stop, they can do something on Olympic values in a nice workshop, but that's all. What is your opinion about the responsibility of the event organizers for especially the younger ones? Because schools are sometimes complaining that their students are out for such a long time, not doing anything than training during that event. Now, I know coaches are not always in favor of this sort of things, but once they did the competition, once they did their own discipline, sometimes there is time to do something. Also in this particular reason. What is your opinion about the responsibility of event organizers or even the international federations in this respect? Julie?
Well, I think that the international federations and also the national federations and the clubs should have, or they have responsibility in this, to create environment that education and going to school is possible even there, like creating it. There are different measures to that. But another point is that we should see these, we in schools, we should see these tournaments as learning environments. Often the kids learn much more during the tournament, a lot of skills that are very important, that they learn more there than they would learn in school. Because now I think the learning is changing a lot, and we should see to that we find a way to work with the educational institutes that this learning in tournaments, we can turn it to formal learning.
Wolfgang?
Yeah. I think one thing is for sure and has to be acknowledged. Dual career has to be carried by all players involved. And in this certain case, all players involved means school or educational institution, whatever, or organizers and sport trainers. So step by step, I think the responsibility of the school is to provide a functioning e-learning and communication system for young talents that go abroad, no matter if it's temporary, if it's a week, if it's 2 weeks, it's a month. It is a phenomena, and this is an Austrian perspective right now, but I could imagine it could also be a European perspective. There is a phenomena. We have these elite schools of sport, how we call them in Austria, since probably 30 years. I've been attending one of these schools myself. It's, I don't know, 15 years ago probably. And I'm now working with my former school myself. And they are struggling with the same things 15 years later. And one main thing is that accompanying young talents when they go abroad is still a very reactive model. So what schools are doing in Austria is they provide material, and that's pretty much everything. So what happens is that these young talents, they get lost on the way, and they are lost when they return back home. So we need a functioning, interactive, e-learning model for traveling athletes. That's one thing. The other thing is we need communication channels that are understood and respected by young talents. It is not us saying use this communication tool. It is them showing us what they need. It is the way it is. And I want to mention a positive example. It is, for example, the FIFPro initiative that's going on right now. So that's a distance learning study program, especially being used within professional sports. And what they just recently did is they introduced an app. So the entire study is working on an app basis. And this is how to reach athletes nowadays. Okay, so this is the school level. Sorry, I tried to hurry up. The organization part is easier. Create space and create time and inspire young talents. There is no better place than to inspire young talents as there is at international tournaments. Bring a testimonial there. Let an elite athlete tell you something about learning, etc. Okay. And creating space and time is also a matter of,
Thank you.
The trainers.
Paul.
If I look at it from not a research only, but an applied point of view, I see that in the countries I know, the federations take responsibility. But it starts with the coach or the traveling coach or the entourage going with the athlete. What I then see is that they develop organizational measures, learning, materials, and so on. But when they are there at the venue, something happens which makes that the athlete must be well self-regulated almost to take charge of that situation. Because with all due respect, of course you are there to do your thing with regards to competition and performance. So what is actually, in my view, lacking is the fact that our athletes do not always have the competencies to use the system. So with all due respect, yes, social media, WhatsApp, and what so on, but if you don't know how to use it, and if you do not have a coach who respects you and says to you, okay, you want to study, okay, let's go for a jog or whatever, then as a young athlete you say, you know what, I still need 15 minutes, 30 minutes to look at what I want to read for school. So that's where I think that the organizational measures are not sufficient. You need development of competencies, and that's where I go with Thule also. You need to learn them those skills, those competencies to use the time and the organizational measures.
Okay. And within these 5 minutes, you try to define a question for the panel on this aspect of what to do in dual careers, for talented young people, or even the system.